The salt water burned Captain Minjun Park's eyes as he gasped for air, bobbing in the vast emptiness of the Yellow Sea. His MiG fighter, once the pride of the North Korean Air Force, now nothing but scattered debris around him. Blood streamed from his shoulder, turning the ocean water crimson. This is the honorable death I was promised, he thought, watching British warships approach through blurred vision. Minjun's trembling hand reached for the combat knife strapped to his flight suit. His commander's words hammered in his mind. Capture means you have failed the homeland. Your family will bear your shame for generations. Take your life or die trying to take theirs. He had been raised on stories of what British barbarians did to captured North Korean pilots. Torture, humiliation, medical experiments. Every fiber of his training told him to plunge the blade into his stomach rather than face what was coming. But something stopped him. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a primal instinct to survive. Or maybe it was simple curiosity. What if everything he had been taught was a lie? Minjun had been raised on stories of what British barbarians did to capture North Korean pilots. His commanders warned that the British would torture prisoners for information, execute them slowly, perform medical experiments on living captives. Propaganda posters showed British soldiers with exaggerated, cruel features, predatory eyes, grasping hands ready to harm. These were not just rumors, but official military teachings drilled into every pilot from their first day of training. The military instructors were explicit in their warnings. The British collect trophies from their enemies, officers would say during briefings. They will display you in cages for civilians to mock. They are beasts who know nothing of honor or civilization. One widely circulated training manual stated clearly that capture by British forces was a fate worse than any death imaginable. Soldiers were told their families would bear eternal shame if they were captured alive. Their names would be erased from family records. No one would pray for their spirits. In Korean culture, where family honor meant everything, this threat carried tremendous weight. The reality of British rescue operations told a completely different story. When British ships or planes spotted enemy survivors in the water, whether they were Korean, Chinese, or from any other nation, standard procedure was to rescue them if possible. The Royal Navy had dedicated rescue teams whose entire job was finding and saving downed airmen and sailors regardless of which side they fought for in the conflict. British military doctors treated enemy wounded with the same care given to their own soldiers. According to the Geneva Convention, international rules about how to treat prisoners of war, captured soldiers had rights that had to be respected. While not every British serviceman followed these rules perfectly, official British military policy was to treat prisoners humanely and with dignity. Special prisoner of war camps were set up far from the fighting, where captured Koreans would be safe until the war ended. They received regular meals, medical care, and were even allowed to write letters home, though these often never reached North Korea because authorities refused to accept them. Dawn broke over the Yellow Sea on March 18, 1952. The sky turned from black to deep purple to fiery orange as the sun peaked over the horizon. For Captain Minjun Park and his wingman, Lieutenant Sang-ho Kim, this sunrise might be their last. They were part of a special attack squadron, 12 MiG fighters sent to intercept British bombers heading toward North Korean positions. Minjun checked his instruments one more time and tightened the Red Star emblem beneath his flight helmet. His stomach knotted with a mixture of pride and fear. At 24, he had already survived longer than many of his fellow pilots. The radio crackled with the squadron leader's voice. Enemy aircraft spotted. 2 o'clock high. British meteors escorting bombers. Prepare to engage. Minjun looked right and upward. There they were, silver specks against the blue sky, growing larger by the second. British meteor fighters protecting a group of camber bombers. The meteors were newer and faster than the MiG-15S, but the MiGs could climb higher. That was their only advantage. For the homeland, shouted the squadron leader as the Korean planes climbed toward the British formation. The peaceful morning exploded into chaos. The sky filled with the roar of engines, the rattle of machine guns, and the whistle of planes diving and climbing. Thick white contrails crisscrossed the blue like angry chalk marks. Black smoke puffed where bullets hit metal. Minjun pushed his stick forward and dived toward one of the bombers, his finger on the trigger. His MiG shuddered as he fired at the massive British plane. He saw his bullets strike the bomber's wing, but the giant aircraft kept flying, hardly damaged by his attack. A shadow passed overhead. Minjun glanced up and his blood turned to ice. A British meteor was diving straight at him, cannons blazing. He yanked the stick hard right, throwing his MiG into a desperate turn. The British fighter's bullets stitched a line across his left wing. Warning lights flashed red across his instrument panel. His aircraft shuddered violently. Black smoke began pouring from the engine. The controls felt heavy and unresponsive in his hands. He was losing altitude fast, the yellow sea rushing up to meet him. Minjun had no choice. He reached for the ejection handle and pulled hard. The canopy blew away with explosive crack. The ejection seat fired, launching him violently into the freezing air. The force knocked the breath from his lungs. His parachute deployed with a sharp jerk that sent pain shooting through his wounded shoulder. Below him, his MiG spiraled downward, trailing black smoke before disappearing into the yellow sea with a massive splash. Minjun drifted down toward the water, watching the battle rage above. Tiny specks circled and dived, occasionally erupting in flames when a plane was hit. He couldn't tell who was winning anymore. It didn't matter now. For him, the war was over one way or another. He hit the water hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The parachute dragged him under briefly before he managed to release the harness. His flight suit and boots dragged him down, but survival instinct pushed him upward. He broke the surface with a desperate gasp, gulping air into his starving lungs. The salt water stung his wounded shoulder. Around him floated pieces of his MiG, a section of wing, his shattered canopy, an oil slick spreading across the water like a dark stain. As the adrenaline faded, pain and exhaustion took over. Minjun managed to grab a floating piece of his wing to help stay afloat. His mind raced with dark thoughts. I have failed, he thought. I should end it now while I still have the strength. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. In training, they had been very clear. Capture meant shame for him, shame for his family. Better to die by his own hand than suffer what the British would do to him. But something held him back. Maybe it was simple human desire to live. Maybe it was doubt about the stories he had been told. Or maybe dying was harder than he had imagined. The sun beat down mercilessly as hours passed. Thirst tortured him. His wounded shoulder throbbed. Minjun drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes hallucinating that he was home in Pyongyang, walking through spring blossoms with his mother and sister. Then he saw it, a shape on the horizon. At first he thought it was another hallucination, but as it grew larger, he recognized the unmistakable silhouette of a British frigate. Fear coursed through him, stronger than the pain of his wounds. This was the moment of truth. Everything he had been taught told him to take his knife and plunge it into his stomach or let himself sink beneath the waves. Better to die with honor than live with shame, his instructor had repeated countless times. The British ship grew larger. Now Minjun could see tiny figures on deck, pointing in his direction. They had spotted him. His hand trembled on his knife handle. In his mind, he saw his mother receiving news of his honorable death. He imagined his name on the family shrine, his spirit joining his ancestors. But another thought intruded. What if the stories were not true? What if there was a chance to see his family again someday? The British ship was close now, less than half a mile away. There was little time left to decide. Minjun's fingers loosened on his knife. Something deep inside him, something more powerful than his training, more basic than his indoctrination, wanted to live. With a deep breath, he raised his uninjured arm and waved it weakly above the water. The British destroyer turned directly toward him. What happened next would either confirm his worst fears or change everything he believed. Aboard HMS Cardigan Bay, a British frigate patrolling the Yellow Sea, radio operator Thomas Bradford lowered his binoculars and called to the officer on deck. "Sir, man in the water. Looks like a down pilot." Commander Jeffrey Walsh rushed to the railing, squinting against the glare of the midday sun. About half a mile away, something dark bobbed among the waves. "That is definitely a survivor," Walsh said, raising his own binoculars. "And that looks like a piece of Korean MiG floating next to him." Walsh did not hesitate. "Prepare for rescue operation. Full stop. Lower the whaleboat. I want our medic ready." The British sailors moved with practiced efficiency. The giant ship slowed its engines, changing course to create a calmer area of water. Crewmen rushed to lower one of the small rescue boats that hung from davits on the side of the frigate. For sailors, including a medic named William Davies, climbed aboard the small craft as it was lowered to the water. "Remember," Walsh called down to them, "we treat enemy wounded the same as our own." As the rescue boat approached him, Minjun fought a war inside his own mind. Everything he had been taught told him these British sailors were about to torture and kill him. The honorable thing was to drown himself before they arrived. Yet his body refused to sink beneath the waves. The British boat drew closer. Minjun could see the faces of the sailors now. They did not look like the demons from propaganda posters. They looked like ordinary men, young just like him. Some even looked concerned. The boat pulled alongside him. Two sailors leaned over the side, reaching for him with extended arms. Minjun flinched away, certain they were about to strike him or drag him to his doom. "It is okay, mate," one of them said in English. Not understanding the words, but surprised by the gentle tone, Minjun remained frozen. The British sailors did not wait for permission. Strong hands grabbed him under his arms, lifting him from the water with surprising gentleness. Pain shot through his wounded shoulder as they pulled him into the boat. He cried out, then immediately regretted showing weakness in front of the enemy. To his shock, the British medic wearing an armband immediately began examining his wounded shoulder. Instead of causing more pain, the medic's hands were careful and professional. He pressed a clean white bandage against the wound. Minjun stared in disbelief. This was not torture. This was medical treatment. One of the sailors wrapped a blanket around his shivering body. Another offered him water from a canteen. Minjun was too stunned to refuse. The water was cool and clean, the most wonderful thing he had ever tasted. The small boat returned to HMS Cardigan Bay, where more British sailors waited to help him aboard. They guided him gently up the ladder. His legs barely supported him after hours in the water. No one struck him. No one shouted threats. Instead, they took him to the ship's medical bay, where a doctor cleaned and stitched his shoulder wound. The doctor worked with the same care he would give his own men, explaining each step even though Minjun could not understand the English words. Throughout the examination, Minjun kept waiting for the cruelty to begin, but never came. When the doctor finished, sailors escorted him to a small cabin. They gave him dry clothes, British naval fatigues that were too large but warm and clean. They brought him hot soup and bread. Minjun stared at the food, convinced it must be poisoned or drugged. But hunger eventually overcame suspicion, and he ate. Nothing happened. The food was simple but nourishing. As night fell over the Yellow Sea, Minjun lay on a real bunk with clean sheets, his wounded shoulder properly bandaged. Everything he had been taught about British barbarians was proving to be lies. What else had been lies? He wondered as exhaustion finally claimed him.